Hello, my name's Phil and I'm from the Soundproofing store. Today we're here in a beautiful little village just outside of Ripon in Yorkshire, and we're here at the home of Julian and Harriet. A couple of months back they entered a competition on our website to win some free soundproofing materials, and today's the big day. They're going to install the system on the wall, so we thought we'd pop down and see how it goes. So we've got a couple of really interesting things coming up on this video. First of all, we're going to introduce you to the system that they're actually going to use today. This is called the ReductoClip system. It's a brand new system to the UK market that we've just brought out. It's a very high performing system, but very, very slim. We're also going to show you the installation of the system so you can see how it gets put together, how it all gets put on the wall. Then we're going to go into the science and actually explain how it works and why it works. And finally, we're going to perform a sound test. So you're actually going to see the difference in noise before and after the soundproofing has been installed. So we're going to pop inside and we'll get started. So we're inside the house now and we're going to meet Julian and Harriet. This is their lovely home. So tell us a little bit about the noise problem you were having.
So it's just day-to-day noise really, where two families live next door to each other in a semi-detached house. Obviously we've got children, the dogs, we're going to hear each other day-to-day. It's just a bit frustrating because it just disrupts your day if you can hear them and you're worried about if they can hear you.
Of course, that's it. So it's not a case of extreme noise, you've not got really noisy neighbours, there's nothing like that. It's just them just living their day-to-day lives. You all live in your day-to-day lives, but because the wall's quite thin, it's coming through and you're hearing it. So how kind of clear or how loud is it coming through?
Well, we've got great neighbours, fortunately, we're really lucky, but we can hear most of the sort of day-to-day conversations. Right. You can hear walking on the laminate floor, that kind of thing. So just the day-to-day stuff, TV, and it's just, we obviously don't need to hear everything that they're saying, and we don't want them to hear everything we're saying or worry about that. So yeah, it's just that Absolutely. Kind of day-to-day noise. And
it does work both ways as well. That's the thing, that if you can hear their day-to-day noise, they'll probably hear your day-to-day noise as well. So it's a privacy element as much as it's also cutting down the disruption to your lives as well. Okay, so what we're going to do is Julian's quite a handy chap, so he's going to do the installation himself. So we're going to go next door and we're going to get started and we're going to show you guys how it all gets fit together. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're coming out of Julian's house and we're going to nip around to next door where we're going to perform a sound test. And the idea of that is to let us know how much sound is currently coming through the wall before we've installed the soundproofing. So we're going to nip around to next door. And we're going to go and meet David, the sound tester. Okay, so this is David from Environmental Noise Solutions, and he's here today to perform the sound test, which is going to show the difference between the wall before we've soundproofed it and after we've installed the solution. So David, do you want to just talk us through what it is that you're going to do today?
Yeah, it's just a typical sound insulation test to comply with building regulations. But what we're going to do is we're going to make a loud noise in here, measure the volume in this room, move next door, play the loud noise again, and measure how much quieter it is in the other room. Okay. And that will tell us how well the wall is insulating sound.
Okay, so on this side, how loud roughly are you playing the sound?
It's going to be between 100 to 105 decibels. So.
Okay, so that's a lot louder than your average kind of noisy kind of household.
Yeah, you definitely have complaints.
Okay, but it gives us an idea, doesn't it? So this is making the sound?
Yes,
or this is making sound. So it's basically a load of speakers which are going to kind of spread the sound out kind of evenly throughout the room. Brilliant. Okay, well we'll fire away and perform a test. Okay, so now we're back in Julian's house again, and what we're going to do is David's going to play the sound again from next door, and we're going to measure the amount of sound that's coming through into Julian's house on this side. So take it away, David. So we're going to get started with the installation. And as you can see on the wall behind, we've started by marking the spacings of the clips. Now, just to explain, there's a couple of different ways that we can install this system. Now, ideally, in a perfect world, what we'd actually do is build a frame, like a stud frame, in front of the party wall, fill that frame full of acoustic mineral wool, and then attach the ReductoClip system onto that frame. Gives us the best performance, but it takes up 120 mil. Now, for an independent soundproofing system, that's actually very, very slim, far slimmer than all the other systems on the market, but it is still 120 mil, which for a household situation sometimes is just too much for some people to be able to lose. In this case, we really needed to keep it a little bit slimmer. So the other option is to install the clips directly onto the wall. This cuts down the space loss to just 60 millimeters. So very, very slim for a high performance system. So what we're doing now is we're basically marking out onto the wall where we're gonna fix the ReductoClips. Now, the ReductoClips need to be installed at certain spacings. That is basically that along one row of clips, they could be no further apart than 1.2 meters. They can be closer, but you don't want to be any further away than 1200 mil. The distance between the bars should be no greater than 600 mil. So again, they can be closer together, but no further apart than 600 mil. Now, as it's actually quite a small alcove, we've actually gone quite a little bit closer together and just spread everything out nice and evenly. So the bars are actually about 500 apart and the clips are quite a bit closer together, but it's just going to be a nice even spread. So this is a ReductoClip. And the idea is these get fixed onto the wall or onto your frame, and then into these little brackets here we run a metal fairing channel, and that gives us something to then fix our wall layers, so your plasterboard layers, onto. And it basically acts like a shock absorbing bracket, and it dampens the vibration of the sound that's traveling through the wall. Now, the benefits of this system is, first of all, it's very, very slim. The actual clip and bar together are just 25 millimeters, so quite a lot thinner than the other similar systems on the market. It's got 2 isolation points, so basically it has a foam on the back that separates the clip from the surface that you're fixing it to, but it also has this high density rubber at the fixing points, and it's this that takes the weight of the materials that you're adding on, so it's decoupling your wall layers and it's dampening the vibrations. It's also quite a lot wider than all the other clip systems on the market, so your fairing channel is a lot wider. This is much, much easier to screw your plasterboards to. You've got a lot more area to actually fix onto. And finally, it has 2 fixing points. This means it can carry far more weight, which means you use less clips per area to carry huge amounts of weight. And this allows us to get very, very high performance. So we can use this clip in situations like household situations where you've got noisy neighbours, household levels of sound, but it also performs very well right the way up to things like recording studios, home cinemas, live music venues. It's a very, very, very high performance system. So we're going to start getting the clips on the wall, because obviously we are going direct to wall in this case, and this is a solid wall. The first thing is actually to drill a guide hole into the wall so you can then put your wall plugs and your fixing. So Julian's going to get drilling. So all the clips are now placed on the wall. Next step is basically just checking your width of the alcoves so we know how long to cut the fairing channels, because they're now going to clip in. Now, you don't want the fairing channels to actually touch the walls either side. You don't want the movement to be hindered. So they're just going to be just short. So it's measuring up, double checking, and then we're going to go out and cut those fairing channels. As you can see, we've got the fairing bars going up now. Very simple process of just bending the bars, putting them in place and releasing so they snap into the little hook brackets on the clips. So very, very simple, just bend and release. So next step, now we've got the bars and the clips up, is we want to put in some insulation. Now, like I say, ideally we want to build a frame and fit the system onto the frame. That frame gives us a nice 50 mil or more of space to put in an insulation, a good acoustic mineral wool. In this case, because we're going direct to wall, we've only got 25 mil between the brick wall and the start of the plasterboard. So what we're going to do is we're just going to use a spray adhesive just to spray the back of a 25 mil thick acoustic mineral wool and just stick it straight onto the wall. Now, if you do have a wall that's already got a plasterboard on, dot and dabbed or fixed on, then you can use something like a drywall screw and a washer to hold the insulation in place. Because we're going straight onto a solid wall, we're just going to spray adhere it, stick it on, and then we can start with fixing the plasterboards on top. So we've got our 25 mil insulation adhered onto the wall now. This is a 60 kilogram per meter cube acoustic mineral wool. So it's much more dense than your average kind of loft insulation fiberglass. And basically the idea why it's there is only really that if you've got a bit of a cavity space between the wall and the plasterboard, if any sound does get into that cavity, it's going to bounce and resonate between the two layers, and it can actually amplify the sound. So we want to get some insulation in there just to make sure that that doesn't happen. With this level of sound that we're talking about, it's unlikely, but we want to do the best job that we can while we're here. So this is all on. The next stage is to put the first layer of plasterboard. Now this is a 15 mil acoustic grade plasterboard. An acoustic grade plasterboard is basically just a lot heavier, much more dense than standard plasterboard. Has a lot more mass, and it's that mass that blocks airborne sound. So we're going to put the first layer on. One interesting thing with this property is because it's quite an older property, the ceiling is just over the standard kind of 2.4 meter height, which means what we're going to do is we're going to cut the first layer of plasterboard so it finishes halfway up this fairing channel rather than doing a full sheet, because that way we'd be left with a little slither on the top. So we're going to cut the first plasterboard here, and then we're going to fill in the space at the top. So first layer of plasterboard's going on. Just a quick pointer. We don't want the acoustic plasterboard to actually touch any of the surfaces. You don't want it to touch the floor, the ceiling, or the adjoining walls. So what we've got is some 5mm shims that are sat on the floor at the minute. So the plasterboard's actually sat on top of the shims, and we're keeping it 5mm away from the wall by using a shim on the side as well. Once the plasterboard's screwed in, we can take those shims out, and at the end, that 5mm gap is going to get filled with an acoustic sealant. But for now, these are just to keep the plasterboard off the surfaces. So I just wanted to quickly mention, so the screws that we're using to screw the plasterboard layers on are self-drilling drywall screws. So these are basically designed to be able to screw into the metal of the fairing channel. So for the first layer, we're using these nice little ones. They're about 25mm, and that's going to go through the first layer of plasterboard and into the fairing channel. Quick handy tip: before you completely cover up your fairing channels with your first layer of plasterboard, it is helpful if you just make a marking on the side walls, the adjoining walls, the location of your fairing channels. And this means once you put your first layer of plasterboard on and you can't see them anymore, you know where you're screwing when we come to do the next layer of plasterboard. So just nice little mark on the side, show you where your fairing channels are. That's only the second layer. So as you can see, we've got the first layer of plasterboard up now. Just to point out a couple of things, as you can see, we've used a bit of the acoustic sealant on some of the gaps. Because it's an old property, the ceiling's not perfectly straight, the walls aren't perfectly straight, so it's a bit tricky sometimes cutting your plasterboards perfect to maintain that perfect 5mm gap all the way around the edge. So we managed to get the gap in there, but it's meant that we've just had a couple of gaps in between the boards. So all we're going to do is just squirt a little bit of the acoustic sealant in there, so it's all nice and sealed and airtight. So we've got roughly a 5mm gap all the way around the perimeter, so the plasterboards aren't touching this wall, they're not touching the ceiling, they're not touching the floor. Acoustic sealant's going to go on at the end, but for now we're just going to fill in that little bit where we've got a bit of a gap between the boards. So at this point I just wanted to go a little bit into the science. So the thing with sound is there's really two parts to it that we need to address with soundproofing. There's what we call the airborne sound, and that's the sound wave. So when you create a sound, it travels through the air as a sound wave. The second part is that sound is actually an energy and a vibration. And we need to really treat both of those parts to really get a good result. So for the airborne sound wave, that sound is only blocked by mass. Mass is basically weight. So the heavier and the more dense a material is, the more sound it blocks. So this is where the acoustic grade plasterboard comes in. The next layer we're about to install, which is the Tecsound, and then we're going to put another acoustic plasterboard on top. So that's adding a huge amount of weight. Altogether it's about 35 kilograms per meter square. So that huge amount of mass is going to block the sound wave. But the tricky part is that energy and vibration, because as soon as the sound hits the wall, the vibration of that sound is going to travel right the way through any solid, dense material. So what we want to do is absorb that energy and vibration. So by installing the boards onto the ReductoClips, the wall is actually flexible, and you can probably see when I actually push against the wall, the whole wall is actually able to flex and move, which means when the sound wave hits it, the wall can ride out that energy and vibration, kind of like the suspension in a car. The whole wall is able to move with the impact of the sound wave. So the combination of the mass and the resilience, the ability to absorb that shock wave, the vibration, the combination of that is what gives us a really high performance. So this next layer is what we call Tecsound SY100. It's basically a really, really heavy, dense, viscoelastic rubber. Okay, it was originally designed as a kind of replacement for lead. Very, very heavy, very, very dense. So the idea is, because it's self-adhesive, you can stick it straight onto the plasterboard, relatively easy to install, but it adds a huge amount of mass. As well as adding the mass, it's also viscoelastic, which means it also dampens vibrations. So it's a very, very clever material. So it's just a case of just sticking it onto the plasterboard, and then we're going to put another layer of plasterboard on top. So what the guys are doing now is basically the Tecsound has a backing paper on the back. So we peel off a little bit of the backing paper at the top, just to reveal a little bit of the sticky side. Line it up, stick the very top part on. So the guys are just getting it all nice and straight and even now. And then once the top is all lined up, you can then begin to peel the rest of the backing paper off, smoothing it down the wall. So the entire wall's now been covered with Tecsound. Now we're putting the second layer of acoustic grade plasterboard over the top. So the last layer of plasterboard is up on this alcove. As you can see, we started on the other side this time so that the seams of the plasterboard don't match up. But the second layer is on, and it's basically ready for the last step, which is just using the acoustic sealant to go around the perimeter, which is just all around the edge of the wall, filling in that 5mm gap that we've left. Then it's ready for skimming and painting. So we just wanted to show you a little bit of detail here with the fairing channels. Now, in certain cases where, for instance, the wall is longer than the 3-meter length of the bars, so you need multiple lengths across the wall, or like in this case where we're just trying to utilize as much of the material as possible, rather than using whole lengths on every section and having a lot of wastage. What you can do is actually overlap the bars. So what we're doing here is we've basically got 2 pieces of bar, we're overlapping by 150 millimeters, and then we're just securing that overlap by putting a couple of self-tapping screws either side of the overlap. So it's nice and secure, it's not going to go anywhere. You can fix your plasterboard on, but we're utilizing all of the material. Okay, so we've finished installing the system. It's all up. Got the last layer of plasterboard is on. It's been acoustically sealed around the edges, around our 5mm gap, and also some of the seams between the boards where the gap's been a little bit bigger than we'd hoped, just because the wall isn't completely straight and completely flat. David's next door getting ready to perform the second test, so we can see what the result is going to be like after the soundproofing. Now, a couple of things just to talk through before we do the test is that obviously this is a real life situation, a real life property, so there are some real life limitations that are going to slightly affect the test results here. One of those things is that there is a couple of parts of the wall around the coving and the skirting boards at the bottom that we've not been able to fully seal yet, because those side walls have to be finished. Also, the wall obviously hasn't been plastered and skimmed yet. We've just got the bare plasterboard. That's only going to very, very slightly affect things, but it may have some bearing. But the main thing in this property is that there is the chimney breast in the middle, and we know that some of the sound is coming through the fireplace. Now, in a lot of cases where there's a chimney breast, we actually find that it's a good thing. The extra mass of those extra layers of brick on one side and on the neighbour's side helps to block more sound. So usually 9 out of 10, most of the sound is coming through the alcoves either side. However, in some cases, especially if the neighbour's chimney breast has been removed or things like that, you'll find that some of the sound can come through the fireplace. And this is one of those cases. The neighbours have removed theirs, and if you get down on your hands and knees by the fireplace, you can clearly hear the sound coming through that area. And unfortunately, in this case, we've got a wood burning stove very, very close to the back wall. We've looked at a few ideas, but unfortunately there's no options that we can do in this case to get some soundproofing behind there. So we know some sound is going to be coming through, and it's going to come through the chimney breast. But doing the alcoves at least means that we can reduce some of that sound and get a good reduction on what was coming through before.
With a test sound of 100 decibels playing next door, Julian and Harriet's room is now receiving 44 decibels of volume. This means the wall is now reducing 56 decibels of sound. This is an improvement of 4 decibels after soundproofing. 4 decibels might not sound like a high number, but 4 decibels at this high volume translates to a much higher reduction at lower household volumes. Installed on a flat wall with no weaknesses, this system would reduce around 10 decibels. At lower household levels of noise, this reduction should now get the volume to around the 30 decibels quiet level, meaning general household noise should now be blocked out, and more excessive noise levels would be reduced to a low muffled level.
Okay, so there we go. We're all done and tested. Absolutely fantastic results there that we got in the end. We always knew that the test results weren't going to be quite as high as we know it can be if it's just one clean, easy, flat wall. We always had that weakness of the fireplace to contend with. But considering that big weakness, the results that we got were absolutely brilliant. And it does mean that day to day, it's going to mean a massive difference for Julian and Harriet and their family. Things like household noise, TV noise, all that kind of thing that before was coming through should be a thing of the past. So it's going to make a big difference. For those who are interested, for the ReductoClip system, in terms of cost, this is quite a big room. The 2 alcoves together was roughly about 10 meters square, and for all the materials it came in at just under £1,000. So not ridiculously expensive for quite a big room, and a very good system. And for those who want to look it up, it's the ReductoClip system by the Soundproofing store. A very high performance system, very slim profile, just 60 millimeters thick. If you're interested, pop along and have a little look on the website, or give us a call. If you've got any kind of noise problem, you want to talk to an expert about how to address it, then just get in touch. thesoundproofingstore.co.uk.
About 2 months ago, we installed the ReductoClip soundproofing system, and it's been absolutely brilliant. Really pleased with it. It was a really easy system to install. It took about a day. We're able to do that ourselves. We've plastered and decorated over the top, and you can't even tell it's there. It's made a huge difference. The noise transfer between our house and our neighbours in our semi-detached has really massively reduced. So it's really nice to know that we're not going to annoy each other with the kids being too noisy or the dogs barking. It's a great system. It was really easy to install. We really thoroughly recommend it to anyone who is worried about noise or just wants that little bit of extra privacy for their home. Thank you, Soundproofing Store. We're really pleased.